Hey everyone, welcome back. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss an upload. We post new stories every week, and if you want the full uncut versions, you can find those over on Patreon. Link is in the description. Now, let's get into it. Harry Potter had never been good at waiting for bad news to become real. He'd had practice, he supposed. 10 years of Aunt Petunia's silences and Uncle Vernon's reddening face had taught him to read the weather of a room before anything was actually said to know, from the particular set of someone's jaw, that something was coming and that it would not be good. He was used to the waiting. He was not used to the kind of news that arrived, already finished, already permanent, already 10 years in the past. Before you ever heard it, his parents had been murdered. Not gone in the vague and sorrowful way the Dursleys had offered it the few times they'd offered anything at all. Murdered by a man, a thing that had then tried to kill Harry too, and had somehow failed, and had left him with a scar above his right eye that had ached mildly every morning of his life, without him ever knowing why. He pressed 2 fingers to it now, sitting in the compartment with the green countryside blurring past the window, and tried to decide how he felt about any of it. He wasn't sure he'd landed anywhere yet. The boy across from him, Ron, he'd said, Ron Weasley, was watching him with the careful, non-watching expression of someone trying not to stare. He had red hair and a smudge of something on his nose, and a cheerful, guileless face that made Harry feel immediately and inexplicably grateful. Ron had not asked him about the scar. He had asked whether Harry had any of the chocolate frogs left, and when Harry had said no, but there were still a few cauldron cakes, Ron had said, "Brilliant," and taken 2, and seemed to consider the matter entirely settled. It was, Harry thought, exactly the right thing to do. By the time the girl appeared in their compartment doorway, bushy-haired and carrying a frog as though she'd simply acquired it and was now accounting for it, Harry had eaten most of a pumpkin pasty, and was beginning to feel, if not exactly normal, then at least present. Hermione Granger introduced herself with the efficiency of someone who found social rituals mildly inefficient, but was willing to perform them. She told Harry that she'd read all their textbooks already, and that she'd practiced a few spells, and that she hoped they'd been revising as well. Ron looked as though he found this faintly alarming. Harry decided he liked her. The sorting was objectively the strangest thing that had happened to Harry, in a life that now apparently contained a great many strange things. A hat had been placed on his head, and the hat had thought at him, actually thought, in a voice that felt like it came from inside his own skull but wasn't his, and had eventually declared Gryffindor in a tone that suggested it had made a considered decision. Harry had walked to the table in a state of mild dissociation, and sat down beside a girl called Parvati, who had smiled at him warmly, and the applause had washed over him. And he had thought, so that's that then. He hadn't paid close attention to the rest of the sorting. Not for cruelty, only because the names were unfamiliar, and there were so many of them, and his head was still ringing slightly from the hat, and the train, and the boats across the lake, and Hagrid's enormous hands lifting him as though he weighed nothing at all. He caught fragments. Goyle. Longbottom, a round-faced boy who looked like he might cry, and then didn't, which Harry respected. Malfoy, Draco, who walked to the Slytherin table as though the alternative had never been available. Greengrass, Daphne, Slytherin. He didn't know why that one stayed with him. He hadn't looked up in time to see anything useful, only a girl with pale hair taking a seat at the far table. And then the sorting had moved on, and the food had appeared, and Ron had made a sound that was almost reverent. He forgot about it entirely. For 3 days Hogwarts existed in the particular, overwhelming mode of all beginnings. Too much information arriving too quickly. The staircases that moved, the portraits that watched, Snape's classroom that smelled of preserved things and old smoke, the Gryffindor common room with its fire burning even in September, as if it understood that some kinds of warmth were precautionary. Harry learned to navigate corridors he could not yet feel in his bones. He learned that Hermione took notes in 2 colors of ink, and that Ron ate breakfast at a speed that bordered on philosophical. He was, in the small and provisional way available to him, settling in. The owl arrived on a Thursday morning during breakfast. It came through the high windows with the rest of the post. Unexceptional. In the way all the owls were unexceptional. One brown bird among dozens, except that it was carrying something stiff and rectangular and sealed with a stamp that caught the light. And it dropped the package in front of Harry with the mild authority of official correspondence, and then left without waiting for a treat. Harry stared at it. The ministry seal pressed into dark red wax was unmistakable, even to someone who'd only seen official letters twice in his life. He looked up. Across the hall, at the Slytherin table, something identical had just landed in front of Daphne Greengrass. He knew it was identical because she was holding it at the same angle he was, with the same careful stillness that meant she was thinking before she reacted. He knew it because her owl was already gone, same as his. He knew it because, when she looked up, a second or two after he did, or perhaps he only noticed her later, they made eye contact across the great hall for the first time since the sorting, and neither of them looked away immediately. Then Ron said something about whether Harry wanted the last piece of toast, and Harry said yes, and looked down at the package on the table in front of him. He didn't open it at breakfast. Prot? He carried it upstairs after the meal, when the other Gryffindors had drifted toward their first lessons, and sat on the edge of his bed in the dormitory with the curtains half drawn, and broke the seal with his thumbnail. The parchment inside was folded once official, the kind of language that said very little in a great many formal words, which Harry worked through twice before he felt like he had it. A binding accord. Executed in good faith by the parties named below, the first signature was his mother's. He knew it from the shape of it. He had never seen her handwriting, had never had the chance, but something in him recognized the particular curve of the L, the way the letters leaned slightly left, and was completely certain. Lily J. Potter. The ink was old, and the parchment was not quite the color of anything current, and the date written beneath it was 1981, and he sat with that for a moment without moving. The second signature he did not know. A different hand, more deliberate, controlled, the hand of someone who had learned to write as an exercise in presentation. A family name he turned over in his mind without locating any memory attached to it. He read the entire document twice more. It told him very little about what had been agreed. It told him only that 2 women had agreed to something, and that the agreement survived them, and that it had apparently been waiting for him. He sat on his bed in the dormitory with the folded parchment in his hands for a long time, listening to the distant sounds of the castle filling up with the ordinary business of a school morning, and thought about his mother's handwriting. He thought about how strange it was that a woman who had been dead for 10 years could still apparently be making decisions that affected his life. He folded the parchment carefully along its original crease, tucked it into the front pocket of his school bag, and went to Charms. If you enjoyed this chapter, please subscribe and leave a like. It helps more than you know. Full unedited versions are available on Patreon. The original story is not mine. All credit to its author. See you in the next one. He found Hermione in the library. She was already at a table near the back, second row from the restricted section, which was as close as a first year could get without a signed note, with 3 books open in front of her and a 4th balanced against her back. She looked up when Harry sat down across from her, with the expression of someone who had been interrupted mid-thought, but was willing to be patient about it. "I need you to look at something," Harry said. He pulled the parchment from his bag and set it on the table between them. Hermione's eyes moved across it with the particular focused speed she applied to everything written. Harry watched her read. He had the odd, suspended feeling of waiting for a verdict. He wasn't sure he wanted. "Where did this come from?" she asked without looking up. "Arrived Thursday, by owl, with a ministry seal." She read it again. Her fingers moved to the edge of the parchment, but didn't touch it, hovering just above the surface, as though she wasn't sure it was appropriate to handle. "Binding accord," she said quietly. "I've read about these, just briefly. There was a passage in magical law and its historical applications, which isn't technically on the first-year list, but I thought it was worth—" She caught herself. "The point is, a binding accord doesn't work the way a normal contract does. It doesn't close when the signatories die." Harry looked at her. "It transfers," Hermione said. She said it the way she said things she'd found in a reliable source, with a kind of careful precision, not uncertainty. The obligations pass to the heirs. That's the whole point of them. They were used historically to secure agreements between families across generations. Marriage, alliances, land arrangements, trade, guarantees. The sort of thing where both parties wanted to be sure that whoever came after them would still be bound. She paused. "Your mother signed this in 1981? 4 months before she died," Harry said. Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Yes." He looked at the second signature. He'd stared at it long enough over the past 2 days that he could have drawn it from memory. The deliberate, controlled hand, the name he didn't know. "Do you recognize that name?" Hermione leaned closer. "Read it." "Greengrass." A small pause. "That's a wizarding family. Old family. One of the sacred 28, I think. That's a list of—" "I know what it is," Harry said, which wasn't entirely true, but he'd read enough of the history Hermione had pressed on him in the past week to have heard the term. "There's a Greengrass in our year, Slytherin." Hermione looked at him. He could see the moment it connected. "Daphne Greengrass," he nodded. Hermione sat back slowly and said nothing, which was, in Harry's limited experience of her, a significant event. When Hermione Granger had nothing to say, it meant the situation was genuinely unusual. He heard footsteps in the row behind him. They were quiet footsteps, careful, unhurried, the kind that meant someone who didn't want to arrive too fast. Harry turned around. Daphne Greengrass was standing at the end of the row of shelves. She was holding a folded parchment. She didn't say anything immediately. Neither did he. They looked at each other in the still, dusty air of the library, and Harry thought she came to find me. Which meant she'd worked it out too, or some part of it, or at least enough to know she needed to find him. He thought about how long that might have taken her. He thought about whether she'd had anyone to sit across from the way he'd had Hermione. "You got one too," he said. It wasn't really a question. "Yes." Her voice was measured. Not cold measured, like someone being careful about how much they gave away in the first sentence. Hermione had turned in her chair to look. Her expression was the one she wore when she was cataloguing information and reserving judgment. Harry appreciated that about her. "Come and sit down," Harry said, a brief pause. Then Daphne walked to the table and sat in the chair beside Harry's, not directly across from him, which might have felt adversarial, and not pressed close, which might have felt presumptuous. He noticed that. She unfolded her parchment and placed it on the table beside his. They were, identical. The same typeface, the same seals, the same density of formal language. Harry had looked at his often enough to know that every block of text matched. He watched Daphne's eyes move across both versions, the way his had that first morning, looking for a difference, for something that explained why they'd each received a separate copy rather than one document sent to both. The signatures, Daphne said. The first signature on Harry's copy was his mother's. The second was Isadora Greengrass. On Daphne's copy, the order was reversed. Isadora Greengrass first, Lily J. Potter second. Both families had an original. "That's your mother," Harry said, indicating the controlled hand. Yes, something shifted in her expression, barely not quite readable. "She's alive." "She didn't. My mother is still alive." Harry looked at his mother's signature. "You didn't say anything." "I'm sorry," Daphne said quietly. "That was—" "It's fine," he said, and meant it more or less. "It's just, she signed this 4 months before she died, and she never told anyone. Dumbledore's name isn't on it." I looked. That made Daphne's chin lift slightly. Mine either. Hermione had been reading both documents with her hands folded in her lap, not touching. "Here," she said, and pointed to a block of text near the center of the page, about 1/3 of the way through the purpose clause, where the language became dense and then simply stopped being visible, not redacted. The text was there and then it wasn't, in the way of something placed beneath a charm rather than removed. The parchment had a faint shimmer at that margin if you tilted it toward the light, like heat off summer pavement. Concealment charm. The purpose clause. Someone layered it over at least 2 lines. Harry tried reading it. The words slid sideways in his vision, not like the moving staircases, not like magic he could track, but like trying to look directly at something that kept not being where he aimed. He stopped. "Can you lift it?" he asked. "Not yet." Hermione said it without apology. "Whatever caste, this wasn't a student. I'd need to research the specific type. There are a few variations, and the reversal method is different for each." She looked at the shimmer again. "It'll take time." Daphne was studying the visible text that remained, the standard clauses that preceded the concealed section. It says both families entered the accord willingly. She said it carefully, as if testing the weight of the word, in the summer of 1981. "Yes, my mother told me nothing about this." Another measured pause. "She received the package the same day I did. I know because I asked at the post, and they confirmed an adult owl went to the same house." She looked at Harry directly for the first time since sitting down. Her eyes were grey and steady. Harry thought about that, his mother's signature on a contract. His mother had never mentioned Daphne's mother alive and receiving her own notification and choosing silence, Dumbledore's name absent from both copies. The purpose clause hidden beneath a charm that neither of them could touch. "So, both our mothers knew," he said. "And yours is choosing not to explain it," Daphne said. "Yes." Hermione looked between them. "The accord transfers obligations to heirs," she said slowly, "which means whatever they agreed to, it applies to you now." "Both of you." She glanced at Harry. "Even though we can't read what it is, the library settled around them." Somewhere distant, a door opened, and a group of students passed in the corridor outside, voices overlapping and receding. In here, there was only the sound of old books and the particular quality of quiet that comes from being in the presence of something not yet understood. Harry looked at the shimmer at the edge of the purpose clause. He thought about his mother choosing to sign her name to something in the summer of 1981, 4 months before she died, and not telling anyone who might have told him. He thought, She had reasons. He just didn't know yet what they were. If you enjoyed this chapter, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely helps the channel grow. Full, unedited versions are always on Patreon, link in the description. All credit to the original author. See you in the next one. McGonagall's office was not what Harry had expected. He had expected something severe. Bare stone, a chair designed for discomfort, the particular atmosphere of a room whose purpose was to make students feel they had made a mistake. What he found instead was a fire and books, and a tartan tin on the corner of the desk that almost certainly contained biscuits, and a cat that had been a cat a moment ago and was now Professor McGonagall, which Harry was nearly certain he would never entirely get used to. She looked at him over the rim of her glasses. "Mr. Potter, sit down." He sat. He pulled the parchment from his bag and set it on the desk between them without preamble. Because he had spent the walk here trying to decide how to begin, and had concluded that there was no good way to begin, only a beginning. McGonagall looked at it. She didn't touch it immediately. She read it from where it lay, and Harry watched her face do something he hadn't seen it do in 3 weeks of lessons. Go carefully, deliberately still. Not the stillness of surprise, the stillness of someone managing a reaction they had decided not to show. "Where did you receive this?" she asked. "By owl, Thursday morning, ministry seal." He paused. "Daphne Greengrass got one too. Her copy has the same text and both signatures, just the other way around." McGonagall's expression didn't shift. She picked up the parchment, finally, holding it at the edges. Read it through once. Then again more slowly, and Harry saw her eyes stop at the shimmer in the purpose clause, the place where the concealment made the text slide sideways if you tried to read it directly. "The concealment charm," Harry said. "We can't lift it. Hermione's working on the specific type." A pause, very brief. "Miss Granger is aware of this document. She helped me identify what it was. She's good with this kind of thing." "Is this real? I mean, is it a real document? Could someone have made it?" McGonagall set it down. "It is genuine," she said quietly. "The ministry seal, the parchment weight, the binding signatures, these cannot be fabricated, Mr. Potter. A binding accord of this kind would have been formally registered at the time of signing a beat. Your mother's signature is authentic." Harry already knew that. He'd known it from the moment he'd seen the curve of the L. But having it said aloud by someone who had known his mother, who had known her as a student, as a person, did something to the air in the room. "What does it bind me to?" he asked. McGonagall was quiet for a moment longer than felt comfortable. "The purpose clause is concealed." "I know. That doesn't answer the question." She looked at him directly. For a second, Harry thought she was going to say something that had the shape of a real answer. But what she said instead was, "These matters are beyond my authority to interpret or advise upon unilaterally. The headmaster should see this. Does he know about it already?" Another fraction of a pause. "Go to his office, Mr. Potter. The password is currently sherbet lemon. Tell the gargoyle I sent you." He picked up the parchment. He thought about pressing her. He could see there was something she wasn't saying, could feel the weight of it. But he thought also about the way she'd gone still when she first read it, and decided that whatever she wasn't saying, she had chosen not to say it for a reason. He would file it and come back to it later. "Thank you," he said, and meant it, even though she'd told him almost nothing. McGonagall's expression did something complicated for a moment. "Mr. Potter," he stopped at the door. "Your mother was she was an exceptionally careful person. She did not do things without reasons." A pause that had the feeling of something offered, rather than given. Bear that in mind. Harry looked at her. He nodded once. Then he went to find the gargoyle. Dumbledore's office was full of things that moved. Harry stood in the middle of it and tried not to look at everything at once, and failed. Instruments on the shelves emitted small sounds and small lights. The portraits on the walls held conversations with each other at a murmur. Behind the headmaster's desk, a bird the color of fire sat on a perch and watched Harry with an attention that felt like being read. Dumbledore himself was standing at the window when Harry arrived, and turned when the door opened with the expression of someone who had been expecting this visit and had been waiting to see how long it would take. "Harry, do sit down. I believe you have something to show me." Harry sat. He laid the parchment on the desk. Dumbledore looked at it for a long moment without picking it up. Long enough that Harry understood he didn't need to read it. "You already know what it is," Harry said. "Yes." Dumbledore sat down. His voice was gentle in the way that carried complete certainty behind it. "I was aware of the accord. I have been aware of it since shortly after its creation." He folded his hands together. "You would like to know why I said nothing." Harry thought about several responses, and chose the one closest to honest. "I'd like to know everything, actually. But I'll start with that." Dumbledore's expression was kind, Harry thought, and that was almost the most unnerving thing about this conversation, because kindness without information was its own kind of war. "The accord was created by your mother and Isadora Greengrass in the summer of 1981. The details of its purpose were their own, to share or not to share, and they chose to incorporate a concealment charm into the document itself." He looked at the shimmer in the purpose clause. "That charm was not placed by me, nor to my knowledge by anyone else." "They built it in," Harry said. "Yes, whatever your mothers wished to conceal, they wished to conceal it so thoroughly that not even the headmaster of Hogwarts, which I was not yet at the time, though they may have anticipated the circumstance, could read it without their consent. A beat. I have attempted to lift the charm. I cannot." Harry sat with that. The bird on the perch shifted its weight, and a low sound moved through it. Not quite a song, something shorter. Harry looked at it without meaning to. "What can you tell me that the document is genuine, that both women signed willingly and without coercion, the binding would not hold otherwise?" Dumbledore's voice was careful, measured, choosing each word. "That I believe. Your mother had reasons for what she did, and that those reasons mattered very much to her." He paused. "And that the accord transferred to you and to Miss Greengrass upon your respective mothers' deaths, or, in Isadora's case, if she chooses to formally relinquish her obligations, which she has not done." Harry looked down at his mother's signature. "She's alive, Isadora Greengrass. She got the notification the same day Daphne did, and she hasn't explained it." "I am aware." "Have you spoken to her?" Dumbledore's eyes were very blue and entirely unreadable. "That is not a conversation I am currently at liberty to have," he said quietly. "These are private matters between families, Harry. The accord is yours and Miss Greengrass's now. The decisions about how to proceed are yours." Harry thought, "You know more than you're saying." He thought, "McGonagall knows something too, and she sent me here rather than say it. Maxed." He thought, "Everyone in this castle knows something about my mother, except me." He picked up the parchment and folded it along its crease and put it in his bag. He stood up. "Thank you," he said, because McGonagall had taught him that courtesy was not the same thing as agreement. "Harry." He looked back. Dumbledore was watching him with something that might have been regret in a person who showed regret. "Patience is not the same as helplessness. You will understand this document in time." Harry didn't answer that. He went downstairs. Daphne was waiting outside the library. She had a book open on her knee and she wasn't reading it. Harry sat down beside her on the stone bench without asking whether she minded. She moved the book half an inch to make room. "He knew," Harry said. "I thought he would. He won't tell me what it says. The charm was built into the document by our mothers. He can't lift it either." He paused. "He says the decisions are ours now." Daphne said nothing for a moment. Then, "My mother's letter came this morning." Harry looked at her. She reached into her robe pocket and produced a folded piece of parchment, not the accord, something new, smaller, written in a hand. Harry didn't know. She offered it to him without hesitation, which he noticed. One line, "Do not pursue this at school." "I will explain at Christmas." Harry read it twice. He handed it back. "She knows it came to you," he said. "She knows you have it, and she's asking you to wait 3 months. Yes?" He thought about who he could write to. He thought about the Dursleys, and almost laughed, and didn't. He thought about Hagrid, who had told him more truth in 1 afternoon than anyone had managed in 11 years, but who had not mentioned any binding accord. He had no one to write to. "I have no one to ask," he said, not with self-pity, just as the fact it was. Daphne looked at the middle distance for a moment. Then she looked at him. "Then we asked together," she said. "Whatever they built it together. So should we." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't particularly warm. It was said in the same measured voice she used for everything, as if she'd reached a logical conclusion and was stating it plainly. Harry thought it might be the most useful thing anyone had said to him since he'd arrived at Hogwarts. "All right," he said. The corridor was quiet around them. Above, the castle went on about its afternoon. Staircases moving, portraits gossiping, the distant sound of someone's cauldron doing something inadvisable in a classroom 2 floors up. Harry and Daphne sat on the stone bench with their separate identical documents and agreed warily to share whatever came next. It was a beginning. It was the only one available. If you enjoyed this chapter, please subscribe and leave a like. It genuinely helps the channel grow. Full unedited versions are always on Patreon. Link in the description. All credit to the original author. See you in the next one. The disused classroom was on the 3rd floor, behind a tapestry of a map that no longer corresponded to any known geography. Harry had found it by accident in the 2nd week of October, following a wrong staircase after charms, and had recognized immediately that it was the kind of room that got overlooked. No portraits, no ghosts who passed through regularly. He had mentioned it to Daphne the following Thursday, and she had considered it for a moment and said simply, "Fine." That was how it worked between them. Practical decisions made without much ceremony. They were not friends. Exactly, Harry wasn't sure what the word was. For 2 people bound by a document, neither of them had chosen, meeting weekly to share what little they knew. Allies, maybe. The alliance Daphne had proposed on the bench outside the library, stated plainly and without warmth, and which both of them had been honoring ever since Hermione had come 3 times now. Tonight she spread both copies of the accord across the front desk. They had dragged it to the center of the room on the first meeting, and none of them had moved it back, and opened the notebook she kept specifically for this, full of cramped, careful script. Daphne sat on one side of the desk. Harry sat on the other. Ron had come as far as the tapestry and stopped. It was leaning against the wall near the door now, not quite inside, not quite out, with his arms folded in a way that Harry recognized as Ron, trying not to look as uncomfortable as he was. "The phrase here," Hermione said, pointing to a line in the visible portion of the purpose clause, the section that preceded the concealed text, which was still unresearched but increasingly legible in context. accorded in terms of sanctuary. That's a specific legal category. I found a reference in wizarding contracts and covenants. It's not common. A covenant of sanctuary is a form reserved for situations where one party requires protection, the other is uniquely positioned to provide. Harry looked at the line. He had read it a dozen times without the vocabulary to unlock it. So, one of them needed protecting. One party, the accord doesn't specify which, but the covenant structure means the protection clause runs in one direction. One family provides, one receives. The problem is that the name of the protected party is directly beneath the concealment charm. I can read around it, but I can't read it. Daphne had been quiet through this. She was looking at the accord with an expression Harry had started to learn, not blank exactly, but held very still, like she was deciding how much of what she was thinking to say. She said, "Could it be both? Could the protected party be both families somehow? Possibly. Covenant structures do allow for mutual protection in theory, but the phrasing is singular. One party requires protection, the other is uniquely positioned to provide." Hermione traced the line with one finger. That's directional, not reciprocal. "So either my mother was protecting yours," Harry said, "or yours was protecting mine. Or the protected party isn't either of the signatories." Daphne said it quietly. "The accord transferred to us. Maybe it was always meant for the heirs." Harry had not thought of that. He sat with it for a moment, feeling it rearrange something in his understanding of the document. His mother signing her name to a contract in the summer of 1981, 4 months before she died. Had she been thinking about him? Had she known somehow that she wouldn't be there to provide whatever she'd agreed to provide? He didn't ask the question aloud. It wasn't a question any of them could answer yet. Ron pushed off the wall. "I'm just going to say it." Harry looked at him. He'd been waiting for this, had seen it building over the past 2 weeks in the way Ron went careful whenever Daphne's name came up, the particular quality of silence that meant Ron was exercising restraint he hadn't entirely decided to exercise. "Greengrass," Ron said, not unkindly but directly. "Her family are Sacred 28. That's not nothing, Harry. That means something about where they stand." She was looking at the accord, and her face had settled into a stillness that Harry had come to understand was not the same as not hearing. "I know what it means," Harry said. "Do you, though? Because trust works in a direction. And I'm not saying she's—" Ron stopped, started again. "I'm saying her family has politics, and those politics aren't yours. You've known her for 6 weeks. Hermione had gone very quiet in the way she went quiet, when she disagreed with something Ron was saying but had decided not to say so yet. Harry looked at Daphne, and Daphne looked up from the accord and looked back at him, and there was a beat between them that had no particular warmth in it, nothing performed, just the acknowledgement of 2 people who were in the same room hearing the same thing. She didn't deny it. She didn't say anything at all. She looked at the accord again. Harry thought about that for a moment, that she hadn't argued, hadn't defended her family's position or explained it away. He wasn't sure if that was honesty or if it was something else. He filed it alongside everything else. He'd filed about Daphne Greengrass over 6 weeks, precise, private, capable of silence in a way most people weren't, with a mother who was alive and choosing not to explain herself. "I hear you," he said to Ron. He meant it. Ron wasn't wrong that trust ran in a direction, or that 6 weeks was not a long time, or that the Greengrass family name meant something specific in certain conversations. He wasn't wrong about any of it, I hear you. But the accord is real, and whoever the protected party is, it's ours to figure out now. Not mine alone. Ron looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the door. Then he sat down, which was as close to conceding a point as Ron usually got, and which Harry received as the gesture it was. Hermione turned another page in her notebook. "There's one more thing." She looked at Harry, then at Daphne. Covenant of Sanctuary designations were kept in a ministry registry, a covenant registry, separate from general binding accord records. I haven't found it yet. But if that registry still exists and isn't sealed, it might hold documentation about the specific terms, what the protection entailed, when it was meant to activate. The Hogwarts Library has legal periodicals going back to the 1942. I'm going to work through them. Daphne said, "I'll look with you." She said it to Hermione, not to the room. "I have access to some of the older Slytherin study references. If the Covenant structure has pure blood legal precedents, they be in there." Hermione looked at her for a moment. "All right," she said, and went back to her notebook. Not warmly, not the way she was warm with Harry or with Ron, but not closed either. Careful, same as Daphne was careful, which perhaps meant they were capable of understanding each other. Harry looked at the accord, at the shimmer where the text disappeared, at his mother's signature at the top, controlled and certain, the hand of someone who had decided something and committed to it entirely. She had reasons. McGonagall had told him that, and he had believed it even then. He believed it more now, looking at a document structured around protection, around the idea that someone had needed something badly enough that two women had built a charm into the parchment so that not even the headmaster could read it without their consent. He didn't know yet what she'd been afraid of. He didn't know whose name sat beneath the concealment. He didn't know even which of their families had needed protecting or from what. He knew she'd done it on purpose, unless he knew she'd signed her name and meant it. For tonight it was enough to keep working. The 31st of October arrived the way bad anniversaries always did, quietly and all at once. Harry woke knowing what day it was before he was fully awake. The knowledge sat on his chest like something heavy that had settled there in the night. He dressed without talking to anyone. Ron watched him from across the dormitory with the careful expression of someone who understood that this was not a morning for questions and said nothing, which was the most useful thing anyone could have done. Breakfast was loud. The great hall had been decorated overnight, carved pumpkins floating near the ceiling, candles guttering in skull-shaped holders, the smell of something cinnamon and spiced drifting from the kitchens. First years around him talked about the feast, with the uncomplicated delight of people who had no complicated relationship with the date. Harry ate half a piece of toast and left. He didn't plan where to go. He found himself on the second floor, then the third, walking without the particular intent to arrive anywhere, until the castle's logic deposited him near the trophy room, a room he had only looked into once before, passing. It was empty at this hour. Cases lining the walls, plaques and cups and shields arranged in the specific silence of things that had once mattered to someone. He went inside and sat down on the floor against the far wall, which was not a comfortable thing to do, and which he did anyway. The trophies had nothing to say. He appreciated that. He had known, arriving at Hogwarts, that the 31st of October would be different here than it had been with the Dursleys. With the Dursleys, it had simply been a day they did not speak of, not observed, not mourned, not acknowledged in any direction. He had not known his parents were dead until he was 8 years old and had overheard his aunt saying it to a neighbor. The anniversary had always felt like something pressed flat, like a thing you were not supposed to look at directly. Here it had a shape. Here his mother had existed, had been a student in these corridors, had sat in classrooms, had apparently done things deliberately and for reasons. had signed her name to a document 4 months before she died. He didn't know what to do with that. He didn't know what to do with any of it. But the not knowing felt sharper today than it usually did. He heard the door. He looked up. Daphne Greengrass stood in the doorway of the trophy room, still in her school robes, her dark hair pulled back the way she always wore it. She looked at him with an expression that was not quite surprise, which meant she had, on some level, known where to look, or had been looking. He should have found that strange. He didn't. "How did you know I was here?" he said. "I didn't." She stepped inside. "I've been walking since dinner." She looked around the trophy room without particular interest, then looked back at him. "I know what today is," Harry said. "Yes." She sat down. Not beside him, but nearby. Close enough that it was deliberate. Far enough that it wasn't presumptuous. She seemed to understand the geometry of company in the same instinctive way she understood most things, quietly, and without requiring explanation. They sat in the silence of the trophy room for a while. Outside, the distant sound of the feast carried through the walls, muffled laughter, something crashing festively, and neither of them commented on it. Daphne said, "My mother sealed every letter I sent after the accord arrived." Harry looked at her. "Sealed how?" "Red wax. Our family crest, usually, but not this time." She paused. "A different sigil. I didn't recognize it." He sat up slightly. "What did it look like?" She described it. A set of scales, but unevenly drawn, with something underneath the balance point that she'd taken at first for a flourish. She mimed the shape of it briefly with one finger against the dusty floor between them. Harry felt something click into place. The specific sensation of a piece fitting that you hadn't known was missing. "Show me," he said. Not to her, he was already pulling the accord from his bag, where it lived now in a warded inner pocket that Hermione had helped him charm in October. He unfolded it carefully, in the low candlelight of the trophy room, and turned it over. On the back, blind embossed into the parchment, a set of scales, unevenly balanced, with a symbol pressed into the base. He had registered it at some point and filed it as decorative without investigating further. He held the parchment out to her. Daphne looked at it for a long moment. "That's it," she said. "That's the same sigil." They both looked at it. "It's not a family crest," Harry said. "Not yours, not mine, no." She took the parchment carefully. She always handled it carefully, which he'd noticed, and tilted it toward the light. "It's institutional, maybe, official." The Greengrass archive would have something like this in a registry reference if it was a governing body of any kind. She handed it back. Hermione might find it faster. She was right. He folded the parchment and put it away. The feast sounds moved through the walls. He thought about his mother at 17, at 20, walking these corridors. He thought about her writing her name on a document in the summer of 1981 and pressing a sigil into the wax. He thought about the 4 months between that summer and the 31st of October, and did not pursue that thought all the way to its end. She was careful, he said, not quite to Daphne. That's what McGonagall told me. That she didn't do things without reasons. She built the charm herself, Daphne said. She and my mother both. That's not careless. No. He looked at the wall of trophies. No, it isn't. Silence settled again, but it had a different texture now. Less the silence of a room he'd retreated into. Alone, and more the silence of two people who had run out of useful things to say and were sitting with what remained. He found he didn't mind it. Daphne seemed to operate comfortably at that register present without demanding anything. After a while he said, "Thank you for coming," and then felt immediately like that was too much. too direct, the wrong shape for whatever this was. She said I wasn't going to sit in the common room and watch people eat caramelized apples. Flat delivery. Completely expressionless. It took him a beat to understand. She was deflecting the thanks, not dismissing it, that she'd come, and didn't want him to make it into more than a practical decision, and he could keep it if he understood that. He almost smiled.
Fair enough.
They found Hermione the next morning before breakfast. She had the Accord spread on a library table with a periodical open beside it. Wizarding Legal Instruments Quarterly, 1983, its spine cracked and its pages tissue-thin. And when Harry placed his finger over the blind-embossed sigil, Hermione went very still in the way she went, still when she was about to say something significant. "It's here," she said. "I found it last night. I was going to find you both this morning." She turned the periodical toward them. The same scales printed in black ink above a paragraph of dense administrative text, the Covenant Registry. It was a ministry-adjacent body that oversaw interfamily protection, Accord's a mediation body. Essentially, you could register a covenant of sanctuary with them, have the terms officially documented, appoint arbiters to interpret the contract in the event of dispute. She looked up. It was dissolved in 1983. Harry read the date, 2 years after the Accord was signed. "Yes," Daphne was reading over his shoulder. Her voice was quiet. "That means there are no arbiters. There's no institution left to interpret it," Hermione said. "If there's a dispute about what the Accord requires, what the protection entails when it activates, who it covers, there's no authority to appeal to. No one who can rule on the terms." She pressed her finger to the sigil. "Whatever your mothers signed, the body that was meant to oversee it ceased to exist 2 years later. You're bound by something with no living arbiters." Harry looked at his mother's signature and at the sigil beneath it. Sealed in, stamped with the mark of an institution that no longer existed, concealed beneath a charm neither of them could read. She had done it on purpose. She had built it carefully and concealed it deliberately, and then, without intending to, he told himself firmly, left him to find it 10 years later in a world that had dissolved the only body that could have explained it. He thought she had reasons. He thought, I hope they were very good ones. The Hogwarts Express left on the 21st of December, with the particular organized chaos of 200 students trying to push luggage through the same 3 corridor doors simultaneously. Harry stood on the platform and watched it go. He had not planned to watch it go. He had simply come down to say goodbye to Ron, who was being absorbed into the Weasley family's gravitational pull even before he reached the barrier, twin brothers appearing from nowhere to steal his trunk handle, his mother's voice carrying from somewhere near the front of the queue. And then the train had begun to move, and Harry had stayed still without deciding to. Daphne was one of the last to board. She moved efficiently, no one to embrace, a single bag over one shoulder. She paused at the carriage step and looked back along the platform. Their eyes met. She gave him a single, measured nod. Not warm, not cold, just the acknowledgement of 2 people with a shared inconvenience, and then she was gone. He stood there until the smoke cleared. It was a very quiet December. Hermione had gone home to her parents with 2 library books checked out legally, and one he suspected she'd borrowed without the librarian noticing. Ron's letters arrived every few days. Long, cheerfully chaotic dispatches about the twins' attempts to enchant the Christmas decorations and Ginny's campaign to be allowed to gnome throw competitively. Harry read them in the Gryffindor common room with his feet tucked under him and wrote back with the dutiful warmth of someone who was glad to hear from a friend and aware, at a low frequency, that this was what normal looked like and that it was something other people had in large quantities. The castle in December was a different place. Smaller, somehow, and quieter than he'd expected, the remaining students creating a loose, informal community that moved at half the academic term speed. He went to meals. He explored corridors. He read 2 books from the library that had nothing to do with the Accord and were about goblin metallurgy, which he found absorbing in a way he couldn't entirely explain. He did not think about the photograph. He had been told it was in the post before he left. McGonagall had stopped him in the corridor on the last full day of term, pressing a small envelope into his hand with an expression he hadn't been able to read. "Forwarded from the Dursleys," she said. "Arrived before September." She hadn't said anything else, and he hadn't asked. He'd put it in the inner pocket of his bag, beside the Accord, and left it there. He opened it on the 23rd. There was no letter inside, only a photograph. Muggle. Still, no movement, and he turned it over before he looked at it properly, because that was the order his hands chose. On the back, in handwriting he did not know, but recognized immediately as deliberate and careful, or, "And I, August 1981. He turned it over. 2 women stood outside a building he didn't recognize. Pale stonework. No visible signage, somewhere that could have been Edinburgh or could have been nowhere he'd ever been. They were laughing. One of them had red hair, and his chest did something complicated and physical at that, a sensation less like seeing a photograph and more like stepping on a stair that wasn't there. The other woman was dark-haired, younger looking than she had probably been, even then, her face mid-sentence with whatever she was saying. He looked at the photograph for a long time. He put it back in the envelope and put the envelope in his pocket and sat very still for several minutes, and then he went to dinner and ate a reasonable amount of food, and did not cry, which he counted as a moderate success. Daphne came back on the 28th. He found out because she appeared at the Gryffindor common room entrance early that evening, which was not a thing that happened. Slytherins did not appear at the Gryffindor portrait hole. And the fat lady had expressed her opinion of the visit in considerable detail before Harry got there, and stood in the corridor with her single bag over one shoulder and her face arranged into careful, deliberate neutrality. "You're 3 days early," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him. The neutrality was very precise, very controlled, which meant something had happened that she was not going to name in a corridor. "There's an empty classroom," he said. "3rd floor." She followed him without speaking. The classroom had the particular quality of all disused rooms, cold, slightly stale, with the echo of institutional silence. Harry lit the candles without thinking about it, which was something he'd learned in October. He pulled 2 chairs into position without ceremony, and sat down, and she set her bag down and sat opposite him. And for a moment they just existed in the candlelight, 2 11-year-olds with complicated situations, sharing the same room in the same cold castle, while everyone else was somewhere else. "It went wrong," she said. "Yes," Harry said, and waited. She pressed her hands flat on her knees. A steadying gesture. He'd noticed she did that, when she was organizing what she wanted to say against what she was actually feeling. "My mother didn't explain at Christmas. Not properly." A pause. "She said enough that I understood some things, and then she stopped, and we didn't speak for most of the rest of it." Harry said, "What did she say? Before she stopped?" Daphne was quiet for a moment, not evasive, thinking, sorting. He had learned the difference. She said the Accord wasn't written to protect a child. She said it precisely as though she'd rehearsed the sentence to make sure she reported it accurately. She said that it was written for Lily. She looked at him then directly. That was the word for. not to protect a family, not the heirs. Lily. Harry sat with that, his mother's name said plainly in a cold classroom. His mother's name as the protected party, the one who had required something, the one whose name sat beneath the concealment charm. He thought about the structure Hermione had described, directional and not reciprocal, one family providing what the other uniquely could. He thought about Isadora Greengrass standing outside a building somewhere and laughing. "Your mother was protecting mine," he said. "That's what it sounds like. From what?" "I don't know." Daphne's hands pressed flat again. "That's when she stopped. She said it was for Lily. And then she looked at me for a moment and she said she couldn't, that she wasn't ready to. A breath, and then we didn't speak, and I came back early." Harry was quiet for a moment. He reached into his pocket. He had carried the photograph since the 23rd, without knowing quite why, without a plan for it. Some instinct that it mattered, that it belonged in the category of things to understand rather than things to file away. He held it out to her. She took it carefully, the way she always handled things that might matter. She looked at it. He watched her look at it. "That's my mother," she said, quiet. "I know. August 1981. 2 months before the accord was signed." He paused. "My mother wrote the caption." Daphne turned the photograph over. Read I turned it face up again. She looked at the dark-haired woman mid-sentence, mid-laugh, 20 years younger and uncomplicated by whatever had come after, and something moved across her face that she did not suppress quickly enough. "They were friends," she said. "Jess!" She handed the photograph back. Her hands were steady. Her expression had returned to careful and neutral and correct, except that it was slightly different than it had been before she saw the photograph, slightly more tired, or slightly more aware of something. He couldn't name the distinction precisely. "She said it was for Lily," Daphne said again. "Whatever it was your mother needed protection from, whatever was happening in the summer of 1981 that made them sign, my mother knew, and she's not ready to say." Harry looked at the two women laughing outside a building. Neither of them would return to August 1981. 4 months, give or take. He put the photograph back in his pocket. "Then we find out ourselves," he said. Daphne nodded once. Unhesitating, unsentimental, as though it was simply the next step in a sequence. He found he appreciated that the lack of drama around a thing that was, in fact, quite large. He got up and set the kettle that lived in the corner of the disused classroom to boil, which was something he'd started doing in November, because the evenings got cold, and they sat in the candlelight and waited for the water to heat, and outside the castle, the December dark came down early and complete across the grounds. January came back cold and specific. The Hogwarts Express returned on the 1st of January, and Harry stood in the entrance hall and watched students filter in from the cold, with their trunks and their leftover Christmas energy, and he felt the castle repressurize around him the way a room does when people fill it back up. Ron appeared from somewhere in the middle of a Weasley cluster, still wearing a jumper with a large orange H on it, and grabbed Harry's arm and talked at him for 20 minutes about something involving a garden shed and Muggle fireworks and their father. And Harry listened and laughed in the right places and was genuinely glad to see him. Hermione arrived on the 2nd, with her 2 legitimate library books and one he was now certain she'd taken without signing out, and a look on her face that meant she'd been thinking about the accord over Christmas and had not found the thinking satisfying. Their first meeting of the new term was on a Thursday 4 days into January, in the disused classroom on the 3rd floor. The kettle had been cold the whole break, and took a while to get going. Harry lit it and the candles, while Daphne and Hermione arranged themselves, and Ron sat on the edge of a desk with his arms folded and his expression of determined fair-mindedness firmly in place, which was what he looked like when he was trying not to be suspicious and not entirely succeeding. Harry sat. He looked at Daphne. "Tell us what your mother said," he said. "All of it, everything," before she stopped. Daphne had her hands flat on her knees. She'd been composing it since December. He could tell, the same careful sorting he'd seen in the candlelight when she came back early, but with a fortnight of additional refinement. She said the accord was for Lily. Not for the heirs, not for the family's, Lily specifically. She paused. I asked her what threat Lily needed protection from. She didn't answer that directly. She said that Lily had been marked for something before James died. Another pause. That phrase, before James died, she said it like it was important, like there was a before and an after, and the threat she meant was in the before. Hermione was already writing, marked for something, Harry said. She didn't say what. No, she said something separate. That was the word she used, that it was something separate from Voldemort's campaign, that they were aware of each other, but that they were, she said, not the same thing. Daphne looked at him steadily. And then she said she believed the accord was Lily's contingency, that she thought Lily designed it in case she didn't survive, whatever it was. The room was quiet except for the kettle beginning to murmur. Harry turned the word over. Contingency, not protection, exactly. Not a shield or a ward, a plan for after. Something Lily had constructed on the assumption she might not be there to carry it out herself. Ron asked, his voice was more careful than usual. She said she wasn't ready. Daphne's expression didn't shift. And then she didn't speak to me for most of the rest of the holiday. Hermione looked up from her notes. Isadora knows what the threat was. She knew Lily was in danger from something other than Voldemort, and she helped her set up a contingency for it. That means she was involved, not just a friend who signed a favor, but someone who understood the situation well enough to be Lily's chosen instrument. Her anchor, Harry said, and didn't know where the word came from, only that it fit. Yes. Hermione turned her notebook toward him. She'd written, Covenant of Sanctuary, Protected Party Guardian Heir, and circled the last part twice. I found a legal commentary over Christmas. A covenant of sanctuary, our structure, directional. One party, providing what the other uniquely could include a provision for a guardian heir. She set the pen down. If the protected party anticipated they might die before the covenant was fulfilled, they could name a person to carry out the original purpose after their death, not just to inherit the obligation to carry out the purpose. Harry looked at the circled phrase. One of you, Ron said quietly. Might be that the kettle boiled. Harry got up and dealt with it because he needed something to do with his hands. He poured 4 cups and distributed them without asking what anyone wanted, which was what he did when he was thinking too hard to manage courtesy. He sat back down. Daphne had her cup in both hands. The protected party's name is under the concealment charm, she said. We've assumed it was Lily because of what my mother said, but the charm covers the purpose clause as well. Tekid, we don't know whether the guardian heir provision is in there, or who it names, or what the original purpose actually was. It would have to be one of you, Hermione said. The guardian heir would need to be an heir of the Covenant's parties. That's Harry, that's you. Or Lily named someone else entirely, Harry said. Before she died, nobody answered that. He drank his tea. He thought about his mother in August 1981, laughing outside a building he still couldn't identify, and then in whatever months followed, making decisions, deliberate, careful decisions about what would happen if she wasn't there. He thought about her writing her name on the accord and building a charm into the parchment that wouldn't lift until whoever came after her had demonstrated. Something he didn't know what. They didn't know what. He looked at the ceiling and made a decision. "I'm going to ask Dumbledore," he said directly. Whether Lily was in danger from something other than Voldemort. Ron looked uncertain. "He already didn't tell you things." "Yes. But that was a general question. This is specific." Harry set down his cup. "He knows. He knew about the Accord in 1981. He said as much in September. If Lily was marked for something outside of Voldemort's campaign, Dumbledore would have known." Hermione said carefully, "He might still not answer. Then his not answering will be an answer." The meeting broke up an hour later. Hermione had a list of next steps in her notebook. Find the commentary's original source text. Check whether Guardian Heir provisions required separate documentation. Cross-reference the Covenant Registry dissolution records against active accords. Ron copied the list without complaint, which meant he'd decided something or resolved something without saying it aloud. Harry folded the accord back into his pocket. Daphne stopped at the door. "Tell me what he says. I will." She nodded once and left. He went the next afternoon. The stone gargoyle moved aside for him without requiring the password, which was a thing he'd noticed before and still found vaguely unnerving. The spiral staircase turned beneath him and delivered him to the office door, and he knocked, and Dumbledore said, "Come in," and Harry went in. The office was full of afternoon light and quiet instrument ticking, and the portrait presence of previous headmasters doing various things in their frames. Dumbledore looked up from something on his desk and gestured toward the chair across from him, and Harry sat and folded his hands and said, "Was my mother in danger from something other than Voldemort?" Dumbledore went still. It was a particular kind of still, not surprise, not discomfort, the stillness of someone who had arranged their face very carefully a long time ago and was maintaining the arrangement, his hand set down the quill. His expression remained warm, attentive, precisely what it should have been. He did not answer. The silence expanded. Harry sat in it and let it expand, and looked at the headmaster and understood, with a clarity that arrived like cold water, that the silence was not hesitation. Dumbledore knew the answer. The silence was a choice. He stood up. He kept his voice level. "Thank you," Dumbledore said. "Harry, I'll see you in class." He walked to the door. His hands were steady. He was angrier than he had been when he walked in, which he had suspected would happen. He was also, underneath the anger, something that took him the length of the staircase to identify. Certain. He had not known before he asked. Now he did. Whatever had been happening around his mother in the summer of 1981, whatever she had been marked for, whatever had made the Accord necessary, Dumbledore knew and had known and was not ready to tell him. Not ready. The same phrase Isadora Greengrass had used. He thought, "I am not going to wait for people to be ready." He walked back toward the third floor, and a castle moved around him, indifferent and enormous and full of things that had been kept from him for 10 years, and he held on to the certainty the way you hold on to something in the dark, when you can't see what's in front of you. It was enough for now. Hermione found it on a Tuesday in February, which was the kind of thing that happened to Hermione. Not on a dramatic evening with candles and everyone assembled, but alone at a library table with 3 periodicals open simultaneously, and her breakfast going cold at her elbow. She didn't tell them until Thursday. Harry could tell she'd been sitting on it because she arrived at the disused classroom with her notes already in order and a particular quality of contained energy that meant she had organized the information into a presentation and was waiting for the correct moment to deploy it. She set 3 pieces of parchment on the table in front of them, copies, not originals, in her own careful hand, and said, The Covenant Registry was dissolved by ministry order in September 1983. And let that land. Daphne said, "We knew it was dissolved. We knew it was dissolved in 1983. We didn't know why." Hermione pressed a finger to the first parchment. The official reason given was administrative consolidation. But I found a dissolution record in the back pages of a ministry law periodical from 1984. The registry had 5 sitting arbiters. 3 of them died between November 1981 and September 1983. She paused. The causes listed are mundane. 1 cardiac event, 1 illness, 1 listed as misadventure. Ron said, "That's a lot. It's exactly that." Hermione moved her finger to the second sheet, where she'd copied the 3 names and their dates. November 1981, September 1983. All 3 witnessed the accord. That's what registry arbiters did. They witnessed and archived. These 3 specifically would have handled the Greengrass Potter Covenant. He looked at them in relation to the accord's creation date, in relation to October 1981, in relation to everything else he'd been arranging and rearranging since September. After the accord was signed, he said, but before it could be formally archived. Yes, Hermione's voice was careful. The timing isn't provable as causation. The record doesn't suggest anything other than what's listed. But the registry's dissolution was ordered 6 months after the 3rd death. Once the 3 witnesses were gone and the remaining 2 arbiters were, the word used, was insufficient for continued operation. The whole body was shuttered. Daphne had gone very still. Harry recognized the stillness. It was the same one she deployed when something confirmed a suspicion she had not wanted confirmed. She looked at the dates on the parchment and said nothing for a moment. "Whoever wanted the covenant buried was methodical," she said. The word sat in the room. Ron said, "We don't know that someone." 3 arbiters, Harry cut across him, not unkindly. All dead within 2 years of signing an accord that someone has been concealing for a decade. I think we're past coincidence. Ron was quiet. They mapped it out on the 3rd piece of parchment. Hermione had already started the structure, and Harry and Daphne filled in what they knew. The accord signed in summer 1981, the concealment charm built in by Lily and Isadora, themselves. October 1981, Lily dead. November 1981, the 1st arbiter gone. March 1982, the 2nd. September 1983, the 3rd. The registry dissolved 6 months later, the accord arriving 9 years after that via ministerial, delivered without explanation to children who hadn't known it existed. "It survived," Harry said. He'd said it half to himself, but Daphne turned toward him. "It survived," he said again more deliberately. "Someone kept it. It didn't go into the registry, it wasn't archived. The witnesses who could have confirmed its existence were gone. And then it shows up in September, delivered by ministerial, to both of us on the same day." He looked at her. "That's not bureaucratic routine." Daphne looked back at him. Something worked itself out behind her eyes. "Someone inside the ministry sent it," she said. "Yes. And they sent it to both families simultaneously, which means they knew about both copies. Which means they've known the accord existed for some time and chose this specific moment to ensure we received it." "The start of our first year," Daphne said, "when we were both at Hogwarts for the first time. Old enough to receive it, maybe, or old enough to pursue it. Harry wasn't sure which. He was fairly sure it mattered. Hermione had been writing steadily through all of this. Whoever it is may still be at the ministry, or may have had access to archived materials outside the registry's own records. Either way, they took a risk sending it. If someone wanted the covenant buried, that person is not going to be pleased the accord is circulating. That sat with them all for a moment. The door to the classroom opened. Harry looked up. Ron was standing in the doorway, not seated at the table. Harry registered with a small start that Ron had stood up at some point in the last few minutes and drifted there without anyone noticing. He had his arms folded, and his expression was doing something complicated. "I need to say something," Ron said. Nobody told him not to. He came back into the room, but didn't sit. He stood and looked at Harry, and his expression settled into the particular direct discomfort of someone who had been working up to a thing for a while. "You've been at this since September," Ron said. "The Accord, the Registry, Dumbledore, the whole of it. And I've been here for it, most of it." He pressed his mouth together. Port. "But it keeps. The thing is, Harry, you've been talking to her," he said, with a small movement of his head toward Daphne. "More than you talk to me, about things that matter. And I don't think you've noticed." "Harry," said Ron, "I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm saying I've noticed, and you haven't." Ron's voice was not angry. That was somehow worse. "She's a Slytherin. I'm not saying she's lying to you. I'm saying you're further inside, trusting her, than you are trusting me. And we've been friends since September, and you barely know her." The room was very quiet. Daphne was looking at the table. Harry thought about the answer he wanted to give, and measured it against the answer that was honest. "You're right that I've talked to her more about this," he said finally. "She has more to tell me. Her mother has half the information." It's not about trusting her more than you, isn't it?" Harry stopped. There was no clean answer. He could see Ron waiting for one, not wanting to be right, not winning anything, just needing it acknowledged. "I don't know," Harry said. "I don't have a clean answer to that." Ron held his gaze for a moment. Then he exhaled, unfolded his arms, and sat back down. Nothing was resolved. But something had been named that had been sitting unnamed for weeks, and the room breathed slightly differently after that, and Harry thought he would need to do something about it, but didn't yet know what. Daphne's second letter from her mother arrived 2 days later. She brought it to him that afternoon without preamble, holding it with 2 fingers as though she was uncertain whether to be relieved or unsettled. Harry read it, standing in the corridor outside the classroom. It was short, 4 sentences. "Do not let anyone at the ministry know the document still exists. Do not discuss it in letters. Do not trust the official narrative of the registry's dissolution. Keep the Accord hidden. No explanation of why." Now, in February, this warning was being sent. Harry looked up. "She didn't reply to anything you asked her," he said. "This isn't a response to your questions." "No, it's what she decided to say on her own, which means something changed. Something made her decide a warning was more important than explanations." Daphne folded the letter carefully along its existing crease lines. "Someone told her something, or she realized something, or someone at the ministry moved." She tucked it away. Her hands were steady. "She knows the Accord survived when it wasn't supposed to." Harry thought, someone in the ministry sent it, and someone else does not know it was sent. He thought, my mother built a concealment charm, and 3 people who witnessed what she built were dead within 2 years. He thought, not ready. Said twice now, by 2 adults who know. "And I am done waiting for ready. We need to find out who sent it," he said. "Yes," Daphne said. The corridor was empty. The castle moved around them with its usual indifference, and somewhere above them Hermione was probably already reading something, and somewhere Ron was not entirely all right, and somewhere in the ministry a person had made a decision about 2 11-year-olds that had set all of this in motion. Harry looked at the door to the disused classroom, and then at the corridor ahead. They had more ground to cover. March arrived the way it always did in Scotland, grey and damp and unconvinced of its own arrival, the cold not gone, but retreating, leaving behind wet stone and the smell of mud from the grounds. Harry noticed it mostly through windows. He had been spending a lot of time near windows lately. He asked McGonagall on a Wednesday. He had been careful about how he framed it. Not what happened to my mother, not what was she in danger from, but something more precise. Had Lily Potter had enemies outside Voldemort's circle? It was the kind of question that could be answered yes or no without opening anything, and he had stood in her office with his hands loose at his sides and watched her face. McGonagall's expression shifted. It was not a large shift. It was the small rearrangement of someone who had expected a different question, or a less specific one, or possibly no question at all. She had been looking at a pile of essays when he knocked, and she had set her quill down with the careful deliberateness of a person deciding how to be helpful without being useful. "That," she said. I've asked the headmaster. Something moved through her expression that he didn't have a name for. Not surprise, something more like recognition. "Harry." "Thank you, Professor." He picked up his bag from the chair. "I appreciate your time." He left before she could redirect him again. The corridor outside her office was empty and long and cold at the ends where the heating charms hadn't quite reached, and he walked the length of it thinking, that is twice. Two adults who know, and the question isn't even whether they know anymore, it's why neither of them will say it. He thought, not ready. He thought, I am getting very tired of that. Daphne's letter came back from Isadora on a Friday, which meant she had sent it on a Monday and received an answer within the week, which was faster than her mother usually moved. She brought it to Thursday's session without preamble, setting it in the middle of the table alongside the now familiar papers and the cooling cups and the grey afternoon pressing against the window. I asked her one question, Daphne said. Who else signed the accord as witness? Harry looked at the letter. It was short. Isadora had quoted the witness line directly. A name, one name, in clear, formal script. Callum Voss. And beneath it, in her mother's hand, 2 words. Deceased, 1982. Hermione took the letter and read it twice. She quoted it exactly. She said she didn't summarize it. She wanted us to have the precise name, or she wanted to give us something without giving us everything, Daphne said. Her voice was neutral. Ron looked at the name. Who's Callum Voss? Nobody knew. That was the answer, and they all sat with it for a moment. Not a name from Lily's known history. Not a name from the Greengrass family. Not a name Harry had seen in any document or heard from anyone. The Accord's sole named witness, dead within a year of signing it, and utterly unfamiliar. Library, Hermione said, which was less a plan than a reflex. She found what there was to find on a Tuesday. She brought it to them that Thursday. 1 sheet, her own handwriting, the entries brief, because what she'd found was brief. Callum Voss, Ministry Legal Clerk, 1978 to 1982. No known family. No public record of distinction. Died April 1982. Cause listed as accident. He was employed in magical contracts, Hermione said, which is the ministry division closest to what the Covenant Registry did. If Lily needed a witness who knew what the document was and how it worked, he's exactly the kind of person she might have trusted. Harry said, or exactly the kind of person someone would have used to witness it without drawing attention. Both can be true. He looked at the sheet. April 1982, March 1982, the second arbiter. This was 1 month after. The timing arranged itself in his mind without needing to be pushed. He's dead, Ron said. Yes. So the witnesses the arbiters relied on are dead. The arbiters themselves are dead, and the one name we've just now found is dead. Ron looked at the table. Someone was very thorough. Whoever wanted it buried, Daphne said. Not whoever sent it. That distinction had been sitting between them since February. The accord had been sent deliberately. Someone with ministry access had timed it. Known about both copies ensured both families received it at the start of year 1. That person, whoever they were, had wanted the accord found. Whoever had been eliminating witnesses had wanted the opposite. Two different intentions, both operating in the same silence. Harry stared at the single sheet in front of him. The trail from Callum Voss went nowhere. There was nothing left on that end. He said, "We're back to what's under the charm." "Yes," Hermione said, "the purpose clause. Whatever Lily offered, whatever she was trying to protect." He pressed his thumb against the table. "We've been circling it since September, and we still can't read it." He had taken the accord out of his pocket without quite deciding to. It sat on the table now, parchment, slightly worn along its fold lines from handling. He looked at the purpose clause, at the concealment charm sitting over it, smooth and settled and waiting. He had never been able to determine what it was waiting for. Daphne reached out and set her copy alongside his. The two documents lay parallel, identical in every structural way, mirror in their signatory order, the same charm on both. Hermione said softly, "There might not be a way to read it until the charm decides." The parchment flickered. Harry went still. Daphne's hand pulled back. Hermione stopped speaking in the middle of her sentence, and Ron straightened in his chair, and for a single uneven breath the concealment charm over the purpose clause on Harry's copy shifted, not lifted, not dissolved, but thinned. One word. Exchange. Then the charm sealed again, smooth as water closing over a stone, and the clause was hidden, and the document was still, and the room sat in silence for a long moment. "Did you?" Ron started. "Yes," all three of them said. Harry picked up the accord. He stared at the clause. Nothing. The charm was as settled as it had ever been, and the single word was gone back beneath it, and the only evidence it had happened at all was the four of them sitting there, not speaking exchange. He said it aloud, and it landed differently than he expected. Not like a discovery, like a confirmation of something he hadn't admitted he'd been suspecting. "She didn't only ask for protection," Daphne said. Her voice was careful. "No." Harry set the parchment down. "She offered something. Whatever the covenant was built to protect, she gave something for it." Hermione had her pen in her hand but wasn't writing. "We don't know what. The clause is still concealed. We only have the one word. We have the structure." Daphne said, "A covenant of sanctuary, directional. One party providing what the other uniquely could. My mother had something Lily needed, and Lily gave something in return. An exchange." Harry looked at his copy of the accord, at the charm sitting so still over the purpose clause, at the single word that had been there and was now not. He thought about his mother in August 1981, laughing in a photograph outside a building he still couldn't name. He thought about her in whatever came after that autumn approaching, a war that had gone on for years and was maybe going to end, and Lily making contingency plans with an urgency that suggested she knew she might not see the end of it. She had not just sought sanctuary, she had bargained for it. Ron said quietly, "What do you think she gave?" Neither Harry nor Daphne answered. The word hung in the room, and they looked at it from different angles and couldn't get to the bottom of it. Not yet, not with one word and no context, and a purpose clause that had shown itself for a breath and then sealed again. But it had shown itself. The charm was not permanent. Whatever condition governed it, Whatever the accord required of them before it would yield the rest, they had satisfied some part of it, enough for one word to surface. It felt like a door opening a crack. Harry folded the accord back along its worn lines and put it in his pocket. "We keep going," he said. Outside the window, March went on being grey and cold and not quite winter anymore. The kettle sat empty on its shelf. Nobody moved to refill it. There was more to find. There was always more to find, and the word was exchange. And somewhere beneath that charm was the thing his mother had given, and he was not done. The word sat with them for 2 weeks. Exchange. Harry turned it over, the way he turned everything over. At breakfast, between classes, lying awake in the dormitory while Ron's breathing settled into sleep above him. Daphne, he suspected, was doing the same. She had a particular stillness when she was working something out, a quality of not quite being present, and he had seen it often enough in their Thursday sessions to recognize it in the corridors now, when they passed each other without speaking. They did not need to speak. They both knew where it was going. It was Hermione who named the structure first. She came to Thursday's session in April, 10 days after the charm had flickered, the classroom still smelling of old stone, and the faint trace of whatever the kettle had last held. With a restricted section periodical, she had convinced Madame Pins to let her borrow by the simple method of asking, with complete academic sincerity. Reason that refusal would have seemed arbitrary. She set it on the table, open to a page of dense legal commentary, and tapped it twice. "Surety covenant," she said. "It's a subtype of covenant of sanctuary. I found one reference that matches our structure. Almost exactly," she read aloud, one finger moving under the lines. The passage was dry and formal, and said, in language that took longer than it needed to, that in a surety covenant the party seeking sanctuary did not receive it as a gift. They pledged something of equivalent value in return. Not property. A claim. Something uniquely held, legally transferable, of equivalent weight to what the sanctuary was offering. The room was quiet when she finished. A claim, Daphne said. She was looking at the table, not at the book. Not assets. Something uniquely held. Harry knew where it went before anyone said it, and he thought Daphne did too, and he thought they had both been knowing it for some time, without letting themselves say it out loud. It was like that sometimes, unguarded enough to name the thing, other people were stepping around. Lily was Muggle-born, Ron said. She hadn't got family vaults or ancestral land or any of that. If she was pledging something, she alone possessed. He stopped. His ears went faintly red, the way they did when he'd said something he wasn't sure he should have said. "The protection magic," Harry said. His voice came out flat and even, which he was grateful for, because what it felt like was the floor shifting. Hermione looked at him. Daphne looked at him. Ron looked at his hands. The sacrificial protection. The ancient magic that had deflected Voldemort and saved Harry's life, that had burned itself into his skin as a kind of permanent ward, that Dumbledore himself had described as something very old. Lily's love, people called it, as though love was a legal instrument, as though it was a transferable claim. She'd already decided, Harry said, by August 1981. She was making contingency plans because she thought she wasn't going to survive, and she needed sanctuary for something or someone, and she pledged the one thing she had that was worth anything in that kind of negotiation. "We don't know that's what she pledged," Hermione said, careful. "We have the structure. We don't have the purpose clause." "No," Harry agreed. "But we have exchange, and a surety covenant, and a woman who had no assets, and knew she was probably going to die." He looked at the parchment lying on the table between them, the concealment charm sitting as still as it always did. What else could she have offered? No one answered. It fractured both of them. He could see that. He and Daphne were looking at the same conclusion from different angles, and neither angle was comfortable. For Harry, it was this. He had spent 10 years believing his mother had saved him, had chosen him, had died for him specifically. The protection was his. It was the single inarguable proof that someone had loved him in the years before he'd been old enough to remember being loved. And if it had also been a bargaining chip, if it had also been a clause in a legal contract, if the act that had saved him had been simultaneously a payment for something else, he did not quite know what to do with that. It did not make it less. He understood that intellectually, but it made it more complicated in a way he hadn't expected and couldn't immediately untangle. For Daphne, it was something different. He watched her, and he could see the shape of it without needing her to say it. Her mother had accepted this. Whatever Lily had offered, Isadora had agreed it was sufficient. Had looked at a dead woman's sacrificial magic, at the act that would orphan a child and save his life and become the most singular thing about him, and had said, yes, that is equivalent value. That is a fair exchange. Daphne's hands were flat on the table. Her expression was doing the careful work of staying neutral. Harry thought, we are both sitting with something we didn't ask for. He let the silence hold for a moment. Then he said, it doesn't change what she did, my mother. It's still, he stopped, started again. Whatever she gave it. She still made the choice. Daphne looked at him. Something in her expression shifted. She didn't argue, and she didn't agree. She just looked at him as though she was registering something. Ron, Harry said, which surprised everyone, including Ron. You wanted to take this to Dumbledore. Weeks ago. Ron blinked. Yeah. I still think, I know. And Hermione thinks so too. He looked at Hermione, who did not deny it. The two of you argued about it before I said anything, and then you both stopped when I told you I'd decide. He said it without accusation. It was just what had happened. I'm still deciding, and right now, what I need before I sit in front of Dumbledore and ask him anything is to know what my mother gave and what Isadora received. Because I am not walking into that office with half the question, Ron opened his mouth. I know, Harry said. I know what you're going to say. Ron closed it. Hermione was looking at him with the particular expression she got when she thought someone was wrong, but had decided not to say so immediately. Harry appreciated it. He also wasn't changing his mind. He already confirmed he knows, Harry said. He confirmed it by saying nothing, in September and again in January. So I'm not going to give him the chance to say nothing a third time when I still don't know enough to know what I'm looking at. He looked at Daphne. I want to know what Isadora received before I know what Lily gave. Daphne said, she won't tell me, not directly. He pressed his thumb against the table once, then lifted it. But she sent the warning in February without being asked. She quoted the witness line without being pushed. She's giving things in pieces, at her own pace for reasons she's decided on. He paused. She knows what the exchange was, both halves of it. Yes, then she's the only living person who does. Daphne held his gaze for a moment. He had learned by now to read the particular quality of her silences. This one was the kind where she was deciding whether he was right and had determined that he was, but wasn't going to say so enthusiastically. I'll write to her again, she said. Ron let out a breath. Harry wasn't certain whether it was acceptance or resignation, but Ron didn't argue, and that was enough for now. Hermione marked her page and closed the periodical with the careful precision of someone who intended to return to it. The April afternoon sat grey and indifferent outside the window. Harry looked at the accord on the table. Then he picked it up and folded it away. He was not ready to ask Dumbledore anything. Not yet. Not until he knew what his mother had purchased, and what she had paid, and whether the thing she'd given was already gone, or whether some part of it was still sitting in that purpose clause, waiting for the charm to thin again. The kettle was empty on its shelf. Nobody reached for it. Outside, April was trying to be spring, and mostly failing. The grounds would be muddy. The cold was still there in the mornings, retreating by noon, and returning by evening, refusing to commit. There was still more to find. There was always more to find. Daphne wrote the letter on a Sunday evening in early May, at the small desk in the corner of the Slytherin fifth-year common room she had claimed by virtue of arriving first and staying longest. She did not draft it. She wrote it once, and what came out was the most direct thing she had ever sent home. 3 questions. No preamble, no softening. What did Lily Potter pledge as the exchange? What were you obligated to provide in return? Is there a name in the accord beyond the 2 signatories? She sealed it and sent it before she could revise it into something her mother would find easier to ignore. 9 days passed. Harry counted them without meaning to. He noticed when Thursday came and went without anything. He noticed when the following Tuesday arrived, and Daphne's expression across the great hall at breakfast was still the particular closed-off neutral of waiting, rather than the slightly different closed-off neutral of having received something and not yet decided how to share it. He had learned the difference. He wasn't certain when. The reply arrived on a Wednesday. Daphne brought it to the Thursday session, still sealed. She set it on the table between them. Harry looked at it. The seal was not the Greengrass crest. He could see that immediately. The pressed wax bearing a set of uneven scales with a symbol at the base, the same sigil they had traced months ago in the library. The Covenant Registry mark. Isadora had answered in the Accord's terms, not as a mother. She's been thinking about how to frame this, Daphne said. The seal is deliberate. Open it, Ron said. Daphne broke the seal. She read it through once in silence. Harry watched her face do the work of staying neutral and not entirely succeed. Something moved through her expression, brief and controlled, before it settled again. She set the letter down on the table and smoothed it once with her palm, then she read it aloud. Isadora's handwriting was precise and formal, nothing like the single broken line she'd sent in October. This was 3 paragraphs, each answering one of Daphne's 3 questions in the order they'd been asked, and each written as though it were a clause in a legal document, rather than a letter from a mother to her daughter. Lily Potter had pledged the residential anchor of her sacrificial protection magic, the Dursley house, the specific address, the bloodline connection through Lily's sister as a living ward. Not the magic itself, which could not be transferred or contractually assigned, but its anchor, the mechanism that gave it ongoing force. What Isadora had agreed to provide in return was this. She would shelter and raise a child of Lily's naming. If Lily died before the child could be claimed by its designated guardian, she would take the child in. No conditions beyond this, no time frame, other than until the child could be claimed or came of age. The third question, whether there was a name in the accord beyond the 2 signatories, Isadora answered in a single sentence, and it was the sentence that had made Daphne's expression do what it had done. The child named in the accord is Harry James Potter. Daphne stopped reading. The room held the silence. It always held when something landed. Harry was aware of the table beneath his hands, the particular quality of afternoon light through the high narrow window. He was aware of all of this at the periphery, while the sentence arranged itself in the center. His name, in the accord. The designated guardian, Hermione said carefully. She was looking at the letter. Isadora wrote before the child could be claimed by its designated guardian. There's a guardian named Sirius, Harry said. He knew, had known, in some arrangement of facts that had not quite assembled itself until this moment, that Sirius Black was his godfather, and that Sirius Black had gone to Azkaban on the 2nd of November 1981, 2 days after Godric's Hollow. 2 days after Harry became something that needed to be claimed. Sirius was supposed to take me. He was in Azkaban, Ron said. Yes. The silence held another moment. Hermione said slowly. So the accord was written to activate if Lily died and Sirius couldn't take custody. If both conditions were met, Isadora was obligated to take Harry in. She paused, but Sirius was arrested and imprisoned, not dead. The guardian condition, he couldn't take custody, but the condition was never formally resolved. He wasn't declared dead. He wasn't officially ruled unfit. It was just never resolved, Daphne said. Her voice was even. So the accord never activated, Harry said. No. Hermione looked at the letter, but it never expired either. The condition was unresolved, which means the accord remained in force, suspended, waiting. And it has been waiting for 10 years. Harry looked at the parchment in front of Daphne. He looked at the concealment charm still sitting over the purpose clause of his own copy, where he'd set it on the table. Then he looked at the letter again. His name. A house he had lived in for 10 years under a magic he hadn't understood. His aunt, who had hated every moment of it, who had stood in the kitchen in Privet Drive with her thin arms crossed and her face arranged in permanent distaste, his aunt through whom the anchor ran. Petunia, who had been Lily's sister and had taken Harry in and made certain he understood he was unwanted every day he was there. That connection had been the mechanism. His misery had been load-bearing. He did not say any of this. He pressed his thumb against the table once. Isadora was meant to raise me, he said. Daphne looked at him. Yes, but she didn't, because the condition, Sirius, was never formally resolved. The accord stayed suspended, and Dumbledore put me with the Dursleys, and no one told either of your mothers what was happening, and the registry's arbiters were dead within 2 years anyway. He stopped. He was something more tired than angry, which was almost worse. And then the accord sat dormant for 10 years, until someone at the ministry decided to send us both our copies. Yes, Daphne said again. Do you know, Ron said with the particular careful tone of someone choosing words, what your mother made of it, when the accord never activated? Whether she... No, Daphne said. She didn't include that. Harry looked at the accord on the table, at the purpose clause, with its settled charm, at the smooth surface of the parchment that had been folded and unfolded too many times now. He thought about his mother in August 1981 laughing in a photograph. He thought about her making this arrangement, pledging the ward anchor, naming him, writing in the clause, if Sirius cannot take him, Isadora will. He thought about her believing that covered it, that if the worst happened, Harry would be safe. She had not been wrong about the ward. She had not been wrong about Sirius wanting to take him. She had been wrong only about the things she could not have predicted, which was the same as being right about everything she could. He folded his copy of the accord along its worn lines and put it in his pocket. She did everything she could, he said. It came out quieter than he intended. In the time she had, she planned it properly. Sirius, and then Isadora as the contingency. She planned for it to work. Daphne said nothing. He wasn't sure he'd been saying it to her. Ron made a small sound that was not quite agreement and not quite sympathy, and was somehow exactly right. Hermione had her pen uncapped and was writing, her handwriting small and even. She would have notes by next week. She would have cross-references. She would find something useful in this, because that was how Hermione dealt with the things that hurt. Harry looked at the window, May outside. The grounds would be green now, properly green, the hedges filled in, the lawns soft. The cold had finally committed to leaving. The charm had not thinned again, but it would. It had done it once, and it would do it again, and somewhere beneath it was the full text of what his mother had built, and why, and he was going to read it. The Accord had been waiting 10 years. He thought he could wait a little longer. It happened on a Thursday evening. No warning, no flicker, no slow thinning the way they had half expected after April. One moment the concealment charm was in place, settled, as it always was, over the purpose clause, and the next it was not. The parchment sat on the table between them, and the full text was simply there, as though it had always been, as though the charm had decided on its own terms that they had earned it. Harry read it twice before he said anything. The purpose clause was 11 lines. The first 4, established parties and intent language, he recognized from Hermione's legal commentary and from the visible portions they had been reading for months. The 5th line stated the sureties claim, which was the Dursley house, the bloodline anchor, the residential mechanism of Lily Potter's sacrificial protection. All of this he had known, or thought he had known, but seeing it written in his mother's legal terms. Lines 6 through 9 named Isadora Greengrass as Harry James Potter's legal magical guardian, in the event that his designated guardian, Sirius Orion Black, was incapacitated, imprisoned for a period exceeding 12 months, or confirmed dead before custody transfer could be completed. Lines 10 and 11 stated that the covenant would remain in suspension so long as the designated guardian's status was unresolved, and would dissolve automatically upon either the heir's majority or the designated guardian's formal exoneration. Harry sat with this for a moment. Then he said, 12 months. Daphne looked up from her own copy. More than 12 months, he said. That was the threshold. If Sirius was imprisoned for more than 12 months, the Accord was supposed to activate. He looked at the parchment. He has been in Azkaban for 10 years. The room was quiet. Outside the narrow window the evening was long and pale, June settling in, the term running out beneath them. Daphne said, "She would have been waiting for the activation notice, my mother." She said it without inflection, working through it in the same methodical way she always worked through things. The condition was met inside the first year. She would have been expecting something. Ministry correspondence, a formal transfer, a solicitor's letter. A pause. It never came. Because no one was administering it. She looked at the parchment, then at Harry. The registry's arbiters were gone by 1983. No one was watching the suspension condition. No one was monitoring for activation. Harry nodded. He had already assembled this. He had been assembling it since she read Isadora's letter aloud in May, and the charm dissolving had only confirmed the architecture. His mother had built something careful and complete, and it had been sitting unactivated in a ministry filing system for 10 years, because the administrative body responsible for running it had been quietly eliminated. He thought about the disused classroom, the Thursday evenings, the kettle on its shelf, Daphne across the table with her copies and her careful face and her methodical silences. He thought about the Dursleys. There was a second family. Contracted, prepared, willing. There had been a woman who had signed her name to the obligation of raising him. There had been a house he could have gone to, people who had known his mother, an arrangement made in good faith in August 1981, against the possibility that everything would go wrong. And everything had gone wrong, and the arrangement had simply never been called upon, and he had gone to a cupboard under a staircase instead. He did not say any of this. He was not certain he could have said it in a way that was useful. "I need to go to Dumbledore," he said. Daphne looked at him. "I know." He folded his copy of the Accord once, along the worn crease. I know I've been saying I'd wait until I had the full text. I have the full text. He looked at the parchment in his hands. Now I'm going. He went the following afternoon. He laid the accord on Dumbledore's desk, unfolded, the purpose clause face up, and fully legible for the first time. He did not ask permission. He did not wait to be invited. He stood on the other side of the desk and watched Dumbledore's eyes move across the text and did not look away. "You knew," Harry said, "the guardianship clause. You knew this existed." Dumbledore looked at the parchment for a long moment. Then he looked at Harry. His expression was the careful, sorrowful composure of a man who had been waiting for this. "I knew the contingency existed," Dumbledore said. "Yes. I placed you where the protection was strongest." He said it without flinching, which was almost admirable. "The ward your mother built required the bloodline anchor, Petunia, her home, the familial connection. No other location would have sustained it. The Greengrass household, however willing, however prepared, would not have held the ward. So you chose the ward over the agreement. I chose the ward over every other consideration." He paused. "Including, yes, the agreement your mother built as her contingency." Harry said, "You didn't ask her Isadora Greengrass. You didn't contact her. You didn't tell her the accord wasn't activating. You didn't explain your reasoning." Something moved through Dumbledore's face. "No, and you didn't tell me. For 10 years. Harry kept his voice level. He had decided before walking in that he was not going to shout. Shouting would give Dumbledore something to manage, and he did not want to be manageable. The accord says the concealment charm was built to dissolve when the heirs were of sufficient understanding to receive the information. You couldn't override it, but you could have told me on my first day of term, and you didn't." "No," Dumbledore said again. He looked older in this light, or Harry had simply started noticing. "I did not." "Why not?" The silence was brief. "Because I believed you were safer not knowing." Harry looked at him for a long moment. He thought about that phrase, "not ready, not yet, when the time is right," and how many adults had said variations of it, and how all of them had meant the same thing, which was that they had decided on his behalf. He thought about his mother in August 1981 making arrangements, trusting that if she built it correctly, it would hold, trusting the mechanism to work. "I understand why you made the choice you made," Harry said. "I think the ward worked. I think you were probably right that it needed the Dursley house." He folded the accord and held it. "But I want you to understand that Isadora Greengrass signed her name to raising me, and then spent 10 years not knowing why she was never called upon. She made a promise to my mother, and she was never told it had been set aside." Dumbledore said nothing. She deserved to know. Harry picked up the accord. "So did I." He left before Dumbledore could answer. Daphne was waiting at the bottom of the stone staircase. She had not said she would be. She had simply been there when he came down. He looked at her. "He admitted it," he said. "I know. She must have read it in how he was standing." "Did he?" "He said the ward needed the anchor. He said it was the strongest protection. He said he made the choice." Harry stopped. He started again. "He wasn't wrong about the ward. I know he wasn't wrong about the ward. It's still." "Harry," Daphne said. She said it evenly, without ceremony. "He made a choice about your life, and did not tell you or my mother for 10 years. Being right about the ward does not mean the rest of it was acceptable." He looked at her. She had said it plainly without softening to the space between them in a corridor where any Slytherin could have passed and heard her. She was first-year Daphne Greengrass with her pureblood house and her careful neutrals, and she had said it plainly. He was not going to tell her it cost her something. She knew he said, "Thank you." She looked away down the corridor. Her expression settled back into its usual composure, and the ordinary motion of it somehow made the moment feel exactly the right weight. On the 26th of June, the Hogwarts Express pulled out of Hogsmeade Station in the early morning and carried them south. Harry sat in a compartment with Ron and Hermione. The Accord was folded in his trunk. The full text was legible, the charm was gone, and Isadora Greengrass had signed her name to him once in 1981 and had been waiting, in whatever way waiting looks over 10 years. Ever since, Sirius was in Azkaban. The Accord was technically unresolved. There was no clean ending to any of it. He would go back to Privet Drive. He pressed his forehead against the window and watched the countryside begin and kept watching as it went on and on and on. He was thinking about a woman who had stood in front of a set of uneven scales and a symbol at the base, and had said, "Yes, this child is worth protecting," had written her name to it, had meant it. At the back of the train later, Ron had said something that made Hermione laugh, and Harry had laughed too, and it had felt real. He held on to that. He was still thinking about it when the platform came, and the families and the carriages. Daphne stood at the end of the platform for longer than she needed to. He watched from the window, just for a moment, just long enough to see that she was still standing there while her carriage waited. She was looking at the train with an expression he couldn't fully read at this distance. Then she turned and boarded, and the carriages moved, and he didn't see her again until September. That's it for this chapter, and that's it for year 1. The foundation has been laid, and so much more is coming. If you've been along for every piece of this, thank you, genuinely. If you're new and just found this, do go back and start from chapter 1. It earns everything. If you enjoyed it, hit like and subscribe so you catch every upload, and share it with anyone who loves this kind of slow, careful story. There's more over on Patreon as well if you want early chapters and extended content. All credit for the source material belongs to the original author. Until the next